Welcome back to another exciting discussion here on the Champions Path, a platform for all things simulation and training based, designed for our champions in the military, law enforcement, and other first responder roles. I'm here today with Dr. Melis Balban, co-founder and CEO of Neurosmart, a company that has developed a biofeedback stress management wearable system for our champions. It's said to have the capability of monitoring emotional and cognitive stress during scenarios and scenario-based training by mapping stress prior, during, and after critical decisions within these scenarios. I'd like to start with a little bit of your background and the path you took in creating Neurosmart, the company.
Sure. So I'm a neuroscientist by training. I actually did my PhD at Harvard looking at defensive responses in rodents and the neural circuits that guide decision making under threat. But again, for rodents and for physical threats, such as birds looming on them. To catch them. But upon observing animals, many animals, and discovered a novel behavior, which is again when a dark looming object comes from above, they freeze for an extended period of time. That was not known before because it was purely visually guided, and then that led to discovery of other neural circuits that guide this behavior. But the insight I kind of gathered was that these responses were pretty similar in nature to human responses, which kind of made me curious about human defensive behaviors and thinking how we can quantify them in the way that we quantify animal responses. So I moved to Stanford for my postdoc research to Andrew Huberman's lab, where I studied human defensive responses. This time, instead of showing mice different clips and trying to figure out how they respond, we put people in a virtual reality setting and measure their responses. And by responses, I mean their behavior, their cognitive capacity in a cognitive task, their movements, their eye movements, their head movements, their physiological markers such as skin conductance and heart rate, and many others. And we then also moved and looked at different interventions and their impacts on human stress and human defensive behaviors. Ran people through the lab where people would come in, go into the VR, do the cognitive task under stress. I noticed something, which was that people that came in with anxiety did worse, which was already known, but they were not aware of their own behaviors, how they responded, their own physical body, and also their cognitive performance, also their physiology. So there was a lack of awareness when people came in with anxiety versus people without anxiety. So that was kind of the insight that inspired Neurosmart, because I thought, well, what if I built a tool that showed people the data that I was seeing right now objectively, say, look, this is how you did, this is where, the average person's response is. And if we can maybe teach them to be more aware, be more self-aware and self-regulate, then maybe they can improve their behavior and cognition under stress. So that was the insight of Neurosmart. Different law enforcement departments are piloting it and testing it and purchasing it, and it's kind of in the early stages. But yeah, that's where we are.
Why law enforcement specifically, as opposed to maybe high performance, sports and human performance in those aspects?
Absolutely. Well, it did actually come a lot from a scientific perspective, which is what got me fired. Because the threat that we were measuring in the lab was a physical threat. And the threat I was also measuring in the rodents was a physical threat. And so I thought, who actually faces, physical threats that this could be directly applied to, like the algorithms, the relationship of physiology to performance could directly be translated, was the question. And I said, well, maybe law enforcement, maybe first responders, firefighters that literally have to make life or death decisions under stress. So this could have the biggest impact there. There was a hypothesis. And then I went out and did some customer discovery, talked to some local departments. We actually tested it in Mountain View PD where we did run them through a simulation and measure their responses to physiology. And we confirmed that, yes, indeed, what we saw in the lab with a different physical threat did hold for police officers under training. They actually, their performance also declines under these physiological circumstances. So
You
that
had mentioned some of these impacts of stress, and I would assume those impacts were negative. Can you go into maybe some of the major negative impacts that stress can induce, or foster in especially these situations, these
yeah.
high stressful, potential deadly situations?
Absolutely. I like to think of it as a continuum, and stress
Hmm.
pushes us into either edge, either extreme of the continuum. So either in decision making case or action, getting into like
Hmm.
moving from thinking to action, it either delays us. So we found in the lab that it causes more hesitation. People with anxiety, on average, took like 3 more seconds to approach their goal than people without anxiety, for example. So it blocks goal-directed behavior and it delays goal-directed behavior. That's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do, and other people, is to push them towards more impulsive decision making. So it's almost a faster um, impulsive decision making rather than, again, goal-directed strategic decision making.
Could you detail how Neurosmart technology actually works?
Sure. It monitors skin conductance response. So most of the tech biofeedback technologies work with heart rate or heart rate variability. But this is a little different measurement. It measures the conductivity of your skin. This is a measurement that's been used in lab, psychology, cognitive psychology, neuroscience for decades to measure emotional reactions, also cognitive load. But it hasn't really been commercialized, and so that's our kind of differentiation as we use a different measurement. And the skin conductance is a direct readout of the sympathetic nervous system. That is your fight or flight response. So it's literally the electrical conductivity of your skin that we're measuring. It's very simple. That increases with stress. It also increases with other emotions, but in the police training setting, that's usually the dominant emotion. And so yeah, we're monitoring skin conductance response with a wearable device. So I'm wearing it right now. It's actually pretty
Oh,
simple. Um,
yeah.
and
Excellent.
yeah, so it looks like this. There's a sleeve that goes on top of that to kind of cover it. And then they do their training. The data gets transmitted to a mobile device via Bluetooth while they're doing their training. And we also synchronize this with the video capture of the training scenario. So, the phone that the officer is wearing records both the skin conductance and the video. And then it's ready for the debrief. So once the scenario ends, the trainer or the officer can push the button stop and view session, and they'll view their moment to moment stress level in synchrony with their video. So they can kind of see at what point they got stressed, how long it took them to recover. On top of that, we developed some algorithms to score their performance, their stress regulation. So they would get a score, and that's color coded. So if they're in the green, they're good, yellow is okay, and red is bad. So they can track somebody's performance over
Okay.
time. They can see if their training is working to improve the performance. They can see if the breathing is working. So all of these things, we basically quantify the stress regulation for them. It's most commonly
Yeah.
used in scenario-based training in the after-action review or the debrief session. Data is being transmitted to the trainer's device. So trainers also have a device. And when they log into a trainer's account, they can see everybody's data. So they can see on their device, usually it's a tablet, whoever's data they want to see and review. So it's available both to the officer individual. If there's some cases that individuals purchase this and they use it for their own, like athletes, but we also have the capability to share it with the trainer, and so the trainer can view it as well as the officer.
Are there any event triggers? I know you had mentioned for the replayability and the after action. Are there any triggers and timestamps for when there's a readout for a high stressful event on one or maybe multiple users, and that way, maybe you can rewind and replay that scenario during the duration, and be able to analyze, talk, and discuss, what's happening during that situation.
Absolutely. So there's two things. One is because the data is already like the skin conductance is a simple data. Like you will literally see your moment to moment plot at the end. The officers and the trainers can indeed find that moment that they peaked and rewind to that and watch the video as what was happening. So without any doing any sort of analysis or relying on anything they score, they can actually see it just by scrolling through the video. On top of that, we have a real-time alert feature that we're developing right now. So every time, this is based on our research with law enforcement officers that went through training. We've collected many data points from our partner agencies, and we identified times that they made poor decisions. Then we backtracked 5 to 10 seconds and tried to see what the signal looked like. From there, we calculated an average signal that preceded, for example, use of force, whether it's justified or unjustified. That's not our point, but that's just like average what the signal looks like before somebody uses force. And so we based our real-time alert on that to trigger if the signal starts looking like that. So just kind of be like, okay, you're getting a little bit higher, and that's a vibration alert that also gets marked on the data. So the trainers can, in after action review, go back to that red line. They'll see a red line when that happens. And see what happened there, like what triggered them, and have that conversation with the
Yeah, heart rate variability, maybe BPMs. Is that also integrated in the data collection?
It is for R&D purposes only right now. Our algorithms do not take any of that into consideration.
Okay.
But we are looking into how that could potentially improve our predictions and metrics. But yeah, it's there. It's only for R&D purposes. The
Sure.
metrics that current users see do not use.
What's the difference between what you guys are doing with the skin conductance and these other methods of collecting data and try to extrapolate high stressful situations based on these data points?
Well, heart rate by itself is influenced by physical motion, right? So if somebody's running, their heart rate will increase, even though their cognitive emotional load does not. So heart rate won't be able to differentiate between those two. And most of the times, there is motion in especially real scenarios and not the simulated ones. So that's really difficult to use heart. I mean, it's impossible to use heart rate as a measure of cognitive stress in those ones. And it's also, apart from the motion, it's also not as sensitive. Some people are very sensitive. They will increase their heart rate based on just having a negative thought. And some people are not, even though they will have a reaction. But heart rate will not pick that up. So heart rate is just not sensitive, and skin conductance is more sensitive measure of sympathetic tone. The heart rate variability is usually a measure of parasympathetic tone, which is the rest and digest response. We differ from heart rate variability because heart rate variability, as the name says, is a statistical measure, right? So it measures really usually what you see with the variables, for example, is the standard deviation of the distribution of heart rate intervals. So if your heart rate is beating at the second every second, your heart rate variability is basically zero because there's no variance. The more data there is, the more reliable heart rate variability will get. For things like wearables, they will measure your heart rate variability in sleep. So they require hours of data to give you a measure of how rested your body is. Our device gives you a moment to moment. It doesn't need minutes of data to be accurate because it's a direct readout. So you will see your response immediately.
Can you save the data on a user profile to track long-term
Yes.
progression?
Yes,
Interesting.
absolutely. Every
Yeah.
time you want to record from a new user, you sign up as a new user, and so that data, and every time you log in as that user, your data gets lumped in with that user's profile.
How does stress inoculation occur and allow for, I guess, better decision making during high stressful situations?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on how it's introduced in training. Stress is absolutely necessary you need to train in a stressful environment to your body to get used to decision making under that circumstances. At the same time, I mean, I have to say that stress is it's good for decision making, right? It does. You need to be alert, or I should say, being alert, or being physiologically in a higher state than your rest is necessary. So you're more alert. You're realizing the threats better, making quicker decisions. These are all good things and a necessary part of training. However, I think one of the biggest mistakes with stress inoculation is to inducing maximum stress very fast without teaching the officers tools to regulate that stress. So if the officer doesn't know how to regulate their stress, just because they're stressed doesn't mean they know down that they can actually, make decisions under stress. So I think training needs to be at a moderate level of stress because they need to learn at that level, without breaking them.
Right.
How to, like, these tools that we're trying to teach them, like breathing, mental imagery, all these things can be taught at a moderate level of stress, and then they can be tested at a higher level of stress. So the most common cases that it is being used currently is two. One is during the scenario based training, the officers, like the actual scenario section, not the classroom or sort of the demonstration, but the actual, when the officer is going through the scenario themselves, they go through it with Neurosmart. And in the after action review, they see their stress and what led to it. So it leads to a deeper discussion to, with the trainer of like why they couldn't make that decision or what was going through their mind that led them that peak, and then how did they recover. With this, usually trainers teach some self-regulation techniques. So they said, they teach the cyclic sigh or box breathing or whatever technique. We can go in detail about that as well. But and then they go to a different scenario, and they can, when they're wearing Neurosmart all throughout, and they can see how their responses changed, how their stress level went down, and how they did better the second time around. So as a biofeedback tool that's integrated with the scenario itself. Some academies use it just before the scenario to have the officers go through, regardless of how well they do, go through a breathing exercise, so that this is just part of their routine. Everybody goes through a 3-minute breathing, and they use Neurosmart to see, look, this how you see how your levels are going down. Usually this is really helpful for cops for buy-in to these different exercises, because they sometimes there's some resistance, and even though they can listen to the lecture and they know what to do, they don't do it. Not Sometimes there's resistance, sometimes it's just difficult to remember to breathe. So Neurosmart helps to build that awareness of their breath and of their state, so they actually remember and they do it. So there's those self-regulation exercises, so it doesn't just stay in the lecture part.
You provide those stress management tools, and how they can integrate or not integrate, but take the data and actively improve upon the stressful situations and stressful outputs that officers might find themselves in.
Yes, indeed. In the app, we have a toolkit section, and we're constantly building on that. But that does offer some breathing, meditation, mental imagery, some yoga poses, even that can be done easily after use of force training and other types of training. So there, we do provide a toolkit, and I also talk about it in the train the trainers session. A lot of the trainers already are familiar with a lot of breathing techniques. I just think, even if that was, a lot of times it's not taught explicitly. It's taught in a lecture setting, and then just expected that the officer remembers to breathe. But that doesn't happen like that. We need to bake it into the tactical training. And so I think our lowest hanging fruit for us is to integrate breathing, even if it's just breathing, into the training using Neurosmart. So, yeah, we do provide other tools and toolkit.
Yeah.
I think a lot can be done if we just teach officers how to breathe properly.
What is the current feedback from the end users?
Yeah, no, it's been really, really positive. The reactions of seeing, so we do have a real time feature, as I said, where they can actually see while they're breathing, their levels dropping, and so that response has been really positive. To see, well, we actually see that this is not just woo woo
Yeah.
thing, or your stress or your emotional or whatever. It is something physical in your brain that's changing with breathing, which is fascinating from a science point of view, but it, like, that you have control over, right? And so you can actually see that. So that tangible, that's the feedback we get, that tangible, to be able to see that in real time has been really huge in teaching the breath and actually applying it. We've had situations where officers I was like, yeah, I felt it. I couldn't believe it.
Hmm.
The sec after I saw that, I did that breath, and it actually worked,
Hmm.
and I felt like I was so much calmer and could think more clearly. Yeah, in other academies, we saw that they were actually improving in their stress
Hmm.
regulation based on our metrics and measurements. So that's the other kind of use case.
Hmm.
Is something working? Are we pushing them to the extreme or not? Like sometimes you
Yeah.
think something's stressful, but it's not, and or it's too stressful. So that's the other kind of third use case, I would say,
Right.
that they're using it for.
Company called AU Fire that's developed an injury response simulation system that completely immobilizes limbs through neuromuscular shock.
Mm.
And it's designed to replicate blunt force trauma or maybe a gunshot wound to an extremity, rendering it, incapable of movement.
Mhm.
And the officers have to return fire. They have to reload. They have to, stop the threat all with one arm, and then apply a tourniquet to control the bleeding, and manipulate other tools. And in this experiential scenario, and we've seen that a drastic improvement in performance as the officers are running multiple scenarios. And the assumption is that being in the stressful situation during training multiple times aids in the emotional control with the expectation of better real world performance. And so this would be, a great technology to integrate to not only experience the situation of, maybe getting shot and not being able to use a dominant hand, but also to visually see in a very comprehensive manner whether green, yellow, or red.
Lack of knowledge or skill set also would cause a
Hmm.
spike because there's more emotional or cognitive load. You might panic because you
Hmm.
don't know what to do, or
Hmm.
there's more cognitive load on you because you don't know what to do. So you're going through all sorts of different situations in your mind where maybe if you knew what to do, it would only be a one
Hmm.
thing. So,
Hmm.
so that's the reason it would. So I think those are very related.
Yeah, so I guess it wouldn't be a false negative. It's just an indicator that.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
one thing that we do in our algorithms do is not just about how stressed you get or what stresses you, but it's how you recover and your general profile. So that's kind of
Mhm.
the scientific aspect that we develop. We take that one step forward and say, okay,
Mhm.
but like, how does that relate to performance? Of course, we expect everybody to stress when they see this thing, but how do
Mhm.
they recover from it? How fast do they
Mhm.
recover from it? How many times with do they have a similar reaction? How you recover from that is usually an indication of stress regulation capacity. So, do you panic then, or do you immediately come up with a solution, or do you not panic? And so, I always advise academies to focus on these physical aspects,
Mhm.
like repeat them to muscle memory quite a lot. So, the more that you
Mhm.
repeat them, the less of a load it will create when the stressor does come, so it doesn't actually, it's less likely that you'll overload.
Is there just a general process that the trainers, the individuals, kind of follow to make that a little more efficient?
Yeah, for now, we have sort of the hypo responders and the hyper
Mhm.
responders. It's just
Mhm.
general categories, people that um, sometimes are too calm,
Mhm.
and they're kind of flat, which we don't like, because the ideal situation, the algorithms always compare you to the ideal responder, and the
Mhm.
ideal responder would be someone who is on the way to a call, thinking about uh, the information they're getting from dispatch, thinking about their
Mhm.
options, their training, coming up with, this is what I'm going to do if this doesn't work. So all of these are causing stress and cognitive load, which is a good thing. So we
Mhm.
want you to be activated to some
Mhm.
level, but not activated so high that you can't recover from it, or you're
Mhm.
constantly adding activations, without recovery. People's triggers are different. They get stressed
Mhm.
by different things. So it's
Mhm.
really shows. I think the powerful part is that linking it with the video
Mhm.
and seeing, okay, this is
Mhm.
your trigger. This is where you have
Mhm.
a hard time calming yourself down. So this is
Mhm.
what we're going to focus on.
There an indication that would put one of these profiles in the hypo category?
Yes. So we actually calculate four scores, not just stress regulation.
Mm.
Stress regulation is one of them. One other score is vigilance. So that's the
Mhm.
that's the
Mm.
hypo. score that you're talking about, if it's too flat, then the algorithm will call the vigilance score to be in the red, which means you're not alert enough and likely
Yeah.
not alert. In stress response is what happens to your body physiologically on a hormonal, neuronal, physiological level. Anxiety is when we have this response activated in response to a potential, but not a present threat. The present threat would be fear. So if you
Right.
have a present threat that's in front of you, that's no longer anxiety, then it's fear.
Have you incorporated it into just the daily life of an officer, and get, field experience and field data?
Right. Minimally, mostly in
Hmm.
training setting, but we have worked with some sheriff's department that use it for FTO
Hmm.
training. So they are actually wearing it during the FTO patrol.
Hmm.
And so that's been interesting. They're
Okay.
getting the field training office. The trainers are actually telling me I
Hmm.
finally understand what's
Hmm.
triggering the guy on the street, like why he's stressing, because I can see
Yeah.
in
Hmm.
real time. So that's one. And then I've been doing ride-alongs with cops, and that's when we put them on, and
Hmm.
that's the real deal. So we've only
Yeah.
anecdotally we've done these sort of little mini pilots here
Hmm.
and there.
Are there any modifications if it's a virtual simulation, such as projection based or virtual reality?
So currently, there are some academies or departments that are using it with virtual reality without
Hmm.
any complex modifications. It's low
Hmm.
tech. They're using both techs
Hmm.
at the same time. Essentially, what we do is instead of recording the real action, we record the screen of
Hmm.
the simulator. Like usually, there's a computer that shows what
Hmm.
the officer is seeing, so we record that, and that
Hmm.
way they can relink the
Hmm.
screen to what the officer is seeing on the screen and to the
Hmm.
physiology. So that's how it's been used. So if there are any users out there that are using simulators that want to incorporate physiology, we can do a very short, like a fast, low tech pilot. And having said that, we are also in talks with some of the simulator companies that we might actually integrate into. And so that the feedback has been very positive in terms of the user friendliness of the technology, which
Hmm.
was really surprising to me, but I'm
Hmm.
happy that it is that it just works, and
Hmm.
it's pretty straightforward too. In fact, some departments didn't even do train the trainer; they just figured it out with their
Yeah.
user manual, and so
Okay.
that's been the positive feedback. I mean, we are currently in beta,
Hmm.
running a beta program, which gives agencies access to this to try it out,
Hmm.
and it's really favorable pricing. So,
Yeah.
in addition, we're actually starting pilots with the athletes with
Okay.
tennis and golf right now. But if there are other, uh,
Hmm.
athletes or performance coaches, mental performance coaches that want to try it out, they can reach to me at melis@neurosmartinc.com or info@neurosmartinc.com. Neurosmartinc.com is our website, and
Hmm.
LinkedIn is our most active social media right now. You can follow us on Instagram as well.
Hmm. Perfect. Well, Dr. Melis, thank you for joining the Champions Path. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Mm.
me.